Hello and welcome to the CARES Model webinar. My name is Kendall Hartley. I'm a former high school science teacher and currently a researcher at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. 2020 was an eventful year for the world in general and educators in particular. The mass movement to online learning for students across the United States was met with mixed reviews. The CARES model was developed in late 2020 in an attempt to understand how future educators can be better prepared to teach in a rapidly changing environment. The model was developed based upon the experiences of the developers, myself and Bridget DeLayden, interviews with educators and teacher educators, as well as a survey of teachers. We also took a look at social media posts and emerging scholarly literature. These activities indicated that educators transitioning to online instruction are seeing a variety of opportunities and challenges. We've organized these into the following actions: connect, adapt, relate, engage, and simplify. In terms of connecting, 2020 furthered our understanding of the importance and nuances of connecting with others. Our attempts at connecting at a distance produced mixed results. Teachers found the need to connect in ways that they had not needed in the past. Connectivity needs went beyond simply getting to online access, although that was certainly a necessary precursor, and towards making personal connections with colleagues, students, and parents. Making connections with colleagues was critical in conquering the rapid change in delivery modes. Teachers learned to reach out locally and nationally to identify practices that were working for others. Resources like Twitter, Teachers Pay Teachers, and YouTube became vital to making these difficult transitions. These connections presumed a certain level of technical knowledge and experience from the teachers that maybe wasn't always there. In addition, teachers found the need to connect professionally. They had fine-tuned their craft over the years and found it necessary to quickly adjust to engaging face-to-face experiences in online learning. Classroom ideas emerged rapidly on places like Twitter from early adopters such as Kristen Foley, aka Mrs. Foley 123. Using hashtags such as remote learning and remote teaching, educators were able to find suitable materials and suggestions. YouTube and Teachers Pay Teachers provide similar support. These massive stores of content required a significant amount of curation to find materials that are relevant and engaging. Fortunately, through the use of advanced search tools and recommendation engines, most of these services permitted the identification of age-appropriate and discipline-appropriate materials. However, the most valuable materials were those that were recommended by educators who are facing the same challenges. Connection in terms of social support also became vital. Many educators' worlds became extremely complicated in 2020. They found themselves at the intersection of a global crisis, substantial social unrest, and a massive overhaul of education design and delivery, each of which had far-reaching implications for their own family and friends. It's not surprising that most educators found themselves in need of heightened social support. Professional support networks can contribute to a sense of competence and self-efficacy. However, much more was necessary in 2020. Knowing that other educators are facing similar challenges can help ameliorate the rising anxiety resulting from trying to do too much. Sometimes, what educators need most are spaces to support each other. The CARES model attempts to address this rising complexity of the teacher profession in the simplified component, and we'll talk more about that later on. Connecting with students was not a new revelation in 2020. What was novel was the different avenues through which connections needed to be made. For example, many experienced secondary teachers recognized the value of those brief moments before and after class when they connected with students. These moments were used to make quick personal connections with as many students as possible. Hey, how was your day? Any plans this weekend? Like the shirt? Similar interactions are possible but require more planning when connecting via Zoom. Signing on early and staying online after scheduled meetings became the norm for many. However, the connections do not seem as genuine to some. Body language, context, sound quality, and visual fidelity all contribute to a less authentic feeling. It has been a struggle for teachers to identify the most effective ways to maintain connections with all their students. In a way that is scalable, it proves difficult. Interestingly, teachers who went online in the spring with current students found this much less of a challenge than in the subsequent fall. The fall brought in a new crop of students where that connection had not yet been established. K-12 educators' relationships with parents of their students took on an entirely new dimension as living rooms became satellite classrooms. Teachers now found themselves on stage or on screen in front of not only their students but siblings, parents, and other relatives. The likelihood of everything being recorded was also increased to accommodate various schedules. Anxiety is not a new feeling for teachers, and many observe the expanded audience as an opportunity rather than a challenge. Regardless of the approach, this new forum for teaching and learning placed increased pressures on teachers to avoid any missteps. The next component of the CARES model is to adapt. Adaptation became a key activity as most schools closed quickly when the pandemic emerged. New modes of learning, technologies, learning environments, and home studio teaching are just a few of the many adaptations required of educators. In the spring of 2020, many educators found themselves adapting to a new mode of learning as school buildings shut down in many parts of the world. The initial months presented some challenges that were insurmountable if there was not an established online connection with the students. Courses that did not have a connection through a learning management system such as Canvas or Google Classroom were able to continue with at least some semblance of continuity. But for most, the spring, April, and May were largely consumed by logistics such as distributing computers and completing final assignments. The uncertainty of the summer of 2020 did not provide a great deal of clarity regarding the mode of learning that would dominate in the fall. Ultimately, the fall 2020 academic term would find many educators continuing to teach online. This adaptation was possibly less trying for secondary educators where the self-regulatory skills of students can support learning from a distance. As the age of the student decreases, the challenges for the teachers and parents increase. Ultimately, most educators found themselves delivering a combination of synchronous video lectures and online learning modules. Both approaches were novel to the vast majority of K-12 educators. Adapting to technology becomes a huge challenge, and it became somewhat of a primary activity for many educators. The use of hardware technology such as video cameras, microphones, and document cameras became necessary core teaching skills. Software that may have had a cursory role in classrooms became the primary communication and content delivery platform. Incorporating new technologies has numerous benefits that includes increased student engagement. The willingness of teachers to embrace new technologies in the past increased the likelihood that they were able to make quick adjustments. Use of tools such as Twitter provided support for not only new ideas, but also what has been working for other educators in similar circumstances. Troubleshooting became another primary activity. Teachers found themselves spending valuable instructional and preparation time troubleshooting all of the associated hardware, software, and connectivity problems that are apt to occur. Those who had a foundational set of troubleshooting skills were better able to cope. Those who did not found it necessary to either rapidly develop such skills or depend on others for assistance. Educators have long demurred the occasional interaction with students in the real world. The younger students are often shocked that their teacher could be found shopping for groceries. These interactions crossed an invisible boundary between the private and very public lives of teachers. That boundary was challenged in new ways as bedrooms around the world were converted into home studios. Teachers and students found themselves in unimaginable and at times awkward situations. Careful staging and family scheduling became a critical part of daily lesson planning. This change in the learning environment also had substantial implications for the student and their family. Homes with multiple students and telecommuting adults became the norm. Teachers endeavored to gauge student attention by forbidding the muting of microphones and requiring real-time video. Unfortunately, this presumed a level of environmental control on the part of the student that was often not commensurate with reality. The next component of the CARES model is relate. Establishing relationships with each member of the classroom community is simply good teaching. In an environment where educators and learners are physically separated, this becomes all the more critical. Interestingly, the combination of public and private communication systems that are inherent in learning management systems provides substantial relationship building affordances. However, like most good teaching principles, this process must be planned for and systematically pursued. Planned, purposeful relationship building begins with the understanding the frame of reference of the learner. Culture must be acknowledged and developed at a variety of levels and intersections. While it is beyond the scope of this overview, it is critical for educators to understand the variety of cultures, broadly defined, that are at play in any learning environment. It is also critical for educators to consciously plan for, develop, evaluate, and continually adjust the classroom culture. Much can be gleaned from the literature describing principles and practices consistent with culturally responsive pedagogy. CRP can be complex, novel, disconcerting, and challenging. This can be especially true for educators who are accustomed to membership in the dominant culture. Fortunately, radical changes to pedagogy necessitated by the global pandemic have provided an opportunity for educators to rethink how they relate to students. Addressing diversity among learners in terms of academic needs and technology access can provide a pathway to including a largesse of additional individual characteristics that support the development of the individual. This emphasis on understanding the student contrasts with the view of the classroom as the object of instruction. This classroom view equates to a group of students with characteristics to import for some, like norm reference tests and content assessments, but of little value to the development of the individual. Quoting Geneva Gay, teachers must learn how to recognize, honor, and incorporate the personal abilities of students into their teaching practices. Transformation of the classroom learning environment to accommodate social distancing or school closures has necessitated a shift to tools and processes that can be repurposed to improve how educators and students relate to each other. This can include a more systematic utilization of instructional materials that are better suited to the individual needs of students. Flexibility of the materials is limitless when they are designed with an open mind and accepted norms are challenged. Insisting on the use of instructional materials that follow accepted universal design and accessibility principles can support the type of accessibility that is not only required by law, but also support the beginning level of flexibility that can promote the appropriate customization of instruction. The next component of the CARES model is engage. A focus on relating to students where they are will naturally support learner engagement. It follows that learning environments and experiences must consider relating to the student and subsequent learner engagement as a primary goal. This includes engagement with the classroom community, the broader community, and course concepts. Within the classroom community, it is important for teachers to conceptualize their work in that particular context. This community has its own practices, goals, and culture. Taking a community view of the classroom can support learner engagement in a number of ways. First and foremost, this view provides an opportunity to engage students in the conceptualization of what a community will look like. Engaging learners in the scaffolded development of the practices, goals, and culture will help solidify membership in that community. It also provides an avenue for the discussion of other cultures, beginning with previous classroom experiences. For example, what did you like or dislike about your previous classes? How might that guide this particular course? Also, connections with the broader community are important. Following the development and discussion of a classroom community, the discussion of communities beyond the classroom is important to support that engagement. From the teacher's perspective, this can often provide a better understanding of the communities that the students belong to. Often teachers will have preconceived notions about the experiences and backgrounds of students that prove to be incomplete or just plain inaccurate. From the student perspective, making connections with their own personal experiences will increase the likelihood that they will perceive the classroom community as an extension of their own and concomitantly increase engagement. Engagement in authentic, meaningful experiences in the course content will give students a view as pertinent to their own life, and this is also critical to student engagement. This can prove challenging in an era where national standards and testing are valued beyond their educational utility. Notwithstanding these challenges, identifying critical social issues that serve as an organizing theme for the class can encourage student engagement. The final component of the CARES model might possibly be the most important. That is simplify. 2020 for many learners and educators was a time of mental, physical, professional, and emotional overload. A prioritization of activities at all levels, lesson level, classroom, school, and district, is required to ensure expectations are reasonable. Support for simplifying the curriculum, learning environments, evaluation, and processes can be found in the research literature in the areas of cognitive science, instructional design, developmental psychology, and socio-behavioral psychology. The calls to simplify in the current context could be described best in terms of educational technology, classroom planning, and curriculum design. Educational technology. It's worth remembering that the primary role of technology is to support educational goals. While some will argue there's a vocational role for the inclusion of technology, it would be difficult to support that as its primary function. Regardless, it's important for educators to critically examine the use of any technology in the classroom. Ideally, the technology is largely invisible in that the role is completed without additional cognitive demands being placed on the teacher or the student. This becomes especially important in online learning environments where the technology can make or break any learning activity. Time and support for the development of skills in using new technologies must be included in the planning for teachers and students. Professional activities must, whenever possible, anticipate the needs of educators as they are required to utilize new tools. If the time and resources are insufficient to support the adoption of the new technology, that incorporation should be reconsidered. Organizing the classroom in a manner that reflects simplifications requires significant forethought. Historically, educators have been trained in what was called classroom management. However, the word management fails to capture the essential roles and requirements of the teacher. Classroom planning might be better described as, and I quote from again Geneva Gay, planning, facilitating, and monitoring experiences that are conducive to high levels of learning for a wide variety of students. Creating and sustaining classroom environments that are personally comfortable, racially and ethnically inclusive, and intellectually stimulating, unquote. This is a complex task that in many ways can be simplified by returning to the core goals of the classroom. By following the guidance from previous components of the CARES model, such as relating activities to community needs and building authentic relationships with students, classroom planning can become a natural consequence of these foundational activities. For example, elaborate behavioral management systems, such as token economies, are less necessary in environments with high levels of engagement. In addition, a recognition that it is described as disruptive in one context might be better described as active engagement if one adopts a more flexible conceptualization of an effective learning environment. In terms of curriculum, a mile wide and an inch deep is a common and often accurate description of too much of what we find in our schools. A focus on testing and standards has had the unintended consequence of creating more content to be covered than is practical and or desired. This lack of depth also prevents educators and students from being able to investigate concepts in a meaningful way. Educators, and to some degree policymakers, can support the manageability of the learning process for students by scrupulously evaluating and prioritizing the curriculum. This might include ensuring that the central concepts are revisited from numerous perspectives. This prioritization becomes especially important when the learning environment is upended in a way that introduces additional stress on teachers and students. The shift to remote learning in 2020 was a source of significant stress, and it required extensive time and preparation to adjust. Covering all of the necessary curriculum to support students' earning high scores on standardized tests is a questionable priority. The CARES model is an attempt to summarize what was learned in 2020 as educators executed an unprecedented instructional transformation. The model can be used to better prepare future teachers and improve instruction going forward. In some ways, the resulting model conforms established best practices while also identifying areas ripe for revision. As challenging as 2020 was for education, the opportunities going forward are boundless and exciting. You can read more about the CARES model at caresmodel.org. Thank you.